A very good evening to all of you. I welcome you all to the ICANN initiative, the Hindu and Indian Express analysis. So before we start with today's topics, as you all know that ICANN video was not uploaded on Friday. So the reason was one, that it was October 2nd, so it was a holiday, and two, because I wanted to upload a video for by giving tips for the prelims exams, so those who were appearing this year for the prelims. So that also took up a lot of time, so I couldn't manage my work, the prelims video and ICANN. And no matter what, whenever if such things happen in the future also, because of work pressure, if I do drop one particular day, then I'll always make sure that we cover the entire portions the next day whenever we meet. So today we'll be covering articles from Friday, Saturday and Monday. So now we'll begin with the first topic of the day, which is about it is an NGO related issue. So we have already seen how NGOs are being constrained and the amendments that have been introduced in the FCRA Act. So you must know good 5 to 6 amendments that have been introduced in the FCRA Act if an analysis on the Act comes as your question. So that we have already seen. So this again, whenever we talk about NGO and the related issues like imposing constraints on the NGOs, this also broadly speaks of our democratic credentials. So if you have any question on democracy and its associated issues, you can also quote these things as examples. And all of these issues come under your GS syllabus too. So now in this particular topic, it is talking about Amnesty International, which is an NGO, which is an international NGO that was operating in India. But this NGO had to wind up its operations from India because its accounts have been now frozen by the government. So why were the accounts frozen? Because the NGO was carrying out, or it was interfering in some of the political debates or topics that were sensitive to our country. So it was kind of interfering in the sovereignty of India and our sensitive political debates. So that is why its accounts have now been frozen. But also remember that Amnesty International is an NGO that had won Nobel Peace Prize in the year 1977. So imposing restrictions and freezing the accounts of an international NGO that has already won a Nobel Peace Prize does not point or paint a good picture about India's democratic credentials in the first place. So also this NGO has recently commented upon India's steps in Jammu and Kashmir, that is how India withdraw the special status under Article 370 that was given to Jammu and Kashmir. So this particular NGO was commenting and it was carrying out activities regarding all that. So it was involved in activities that are related to human rights, that are related to minority rights. It was also very active against death penalty. So abolition of death penalty it was advocating for. So even the refugee rights. So these were the various areas where this NGO was very active and working very actively. So now its accounts have been frozen. So this particular example you can quote when you are analyzing the NGOs and the issues that the NGOs face in their functioning. So now we'll move on to the next topic. The next topic we'll be discussing is about Lal Bahadur Shastri ji. So on October 2nd, as we know, it is the birth anniversary of both Gandhi ji as well as Lal Bahadur Shastri ji. So as part of your GS1 syllabus, you have a topic called as post-independence consolidation. So in this, you are supposed to be reading everything that happened in India after India achieved independence, how all the states were united, and what important measures were taken up under the leadership of the important leaders. So you must as a whole know about the important contributions that have been made by Jawaharlal Nehru, then Lal Bahadur Shastri, Indira Gandhi, Rajiv Gandhi, and the 1991 LPG reforms to the most recent government. All the important contributions that have been made by these prominent leaders, whether to the domestic growth and development or at the international arena, whatever their contributions have been to the overall consolidation of India, you have to know them. So as part of that, you have to know a little bit about the various leaders who have come, who have been in power in India after independence, and what major steps did they take, what challenges they faced. So some of these things you have to know. as part of your syllabus under post-independence consolidation. So you have to know about Lal Bahadur Shastri ji as well. So this particular article, the Prime Minister India Almost Forgot, talks about the contributions made by Lal Bahadur Shastri ji and the kind of challenges that he faced. So first it talks about the moral responsibility. So this is told by giving an example of the railway accident that happened in 1956, after which Lal Bahadur Shastri ji, who had been the railway minister that time, took moral responsibility for the accident and resigned from his minister seat. So this shows how ethical a person Lal Bahadur Shastri was, because even though he was personally not responsible, he just held the post of a minister, but the accident happened somewhere else. But the minister went on to assume moral responsibility for the act, and he also resigned. So this shows how morally responsible he felt for the loss of lives of so many people because of the railway accident. The second is regarding the food scarcity. When he assumed office, India was already facing a lot of food security, food issues. Food scarcity was there. So India was importing a lot of food grains from the United States under the PL program. So like that, there was a lot of food scarcity issues in India which had to be tackled. So India wanted to be self-reliant and self-sufficient when it comes to having food security in India. So this was one more issue that Lal Bahadur Shastri faced when he came to the power, when he became the Prime Minister. So then also the 1965 war, which was the Indo-Pakistan war, and how deftly the Prime Minister led that war and how it gave us a decisive victory over Pakistan, how he pushed away the Pakistan soldiers back from such heights in the Himalayas. So that shows how decisive the Prime Minister was, and such bold steps that he took to drive away Pakistan soldiers back to their country, and he completely freed India. So this war also gave us a kind of confidence booster after we had lost the 1962 war with China. So it was during this time that the India was also simultaneously facing food scarcity issues, and at the same time our soldiers were very boldly facing the enemies at the border, and they were ready to sacrifice and lose their lives. So it was at this point that Shastri ji had given the slogan of Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan. So that is very important that you have to mention in your answers. Next is about the international governance. So before, when it was Jawaharlal Nehru's prime ministership, it was more of a centralized prime ministership where a lot of control was there with the prime minister and the prime minister's office. But in the case of Lal Bahadur Shastri ji, it was more of an institutionalized governance, as in there was more collective decision making. Shastri ji believed in deliberating with the other cabinet members, seeking their opinions, and then finally formulating the decision. So it was not a centralized kind of a relationship, but rather a consultative and a deliberative one. So therefore, this his era saw the transformation from a centralized or a personalized governance to an institutionalized governance. So that is to be written in your answers. Next is you also have to highlight the important challenges that Shastri ji faced during his prime ministership. So these challenges were both there domestically as well as internationally. Domestically, as we already discussed, there was a lot of food security issues that India was facing. Second, there was war on the borders going on. India was already demoralized, completely shattered after the 1962 the war that we lost with China. After that, we were completely demoralized. So this war with Pakistan was very important, and this was one challenge that we were facing. Apart from that, as I said, there was food security, food scarcity challenges that India was facing. So it was at Lal Bahadur Shastri ji's leadership that the Food Corporation of India also came into existence, and then we eventually launched the Green Revolution in the 1960s. So this also, the fact that the FCI was set up and the Green Revolution was started also have to be mentioned under LBS contributions. So as far as the domestic challenges are concerned, apart from the fact that there was food scarcity and the challenges that were there at the border, there were other challenges as well. For example, that time the official language issue was going on, where Hindi was trying to be imposed over southern India. So Tamil Nadu there was a lot of agitations and protests that were going on in Tamil Nadu against the imposition of Hindi. Similarly, it was also the time when the different parts of the country were trying to form their own states. So in Punjab, it wanted a separate Punjabi Suba. So even these kind of violence and protests were there that he faced. So he had multiple challenges on the domestic front which Shastriji tackled. Next, there were also challenges at the international level. Reason being, after our 1962 loss in the war with China, we realized that we also have to improve on multiple fronts, whether it is military, the technology, and the food scarcity issues. So therefore, we started to improve our friendly relations with the United States and all with the United States. So during this point, our non-allied movement, of which India was a leader, which believed in not being a part of any of the two blocks in a bipolar world, that is neither United States nor the USSR. So that kind of got subdued because India started to move closely with the United States. So this kind of subdued the non-alignment movement of which India had been a leader. So this was one of the international challenge that Shastriji faced during that time. Second, also in Pakistan, the leadership got changed. So a new prime minister had come in Pakistan who was Ayub Khan. So like that, there were several challenges at the international arena also that Shastriji had faced. So these were some of the important contributions and the challenges faced during that time, which have been listed in this particular article. But however, you may have to know more about the contributions made by the leader. So a small homework for you today would be to write in the comment section all the important contributions made by Lal Bahadur Shastri ji in different areas, in different fields, so that if you all put that up in the comment section, then all of you can together combine and make a wonderful answer. So collective efforts here is going to pay results for you, because every individual cannot do everything. Rather, if you pull in the resources, pull in your efforts, then that can give a lot of returns. So do attempt this in the comment section. Come out with all the contributions of Lal Bahadur Shastri organized properly in different areas or fields, and then we'll combine all of that and make a good answer. So now we move on to the next topic. The next topic we'll be discussing is online gambling. So online gambling, mainly the kind of question that can be asked is whether online gambling should be completely banned or should it be regulated. So when it comes to any kind of regulation, regulatory bodies, the government regulations, it is mostly under your GS paper 2. So until and unless it is some regulation of some economic activity which may be part of your GS3 syllabus, but otherwise it will be under your GS syllabus 2. So this is a kind of one of those miscellaneous topics which UPSC may once in a while just ask, and you must not be caught by surprise. So that is why we are covering this topic as well. So online gambling is, as we know, gambling is a game of chance. So it happens otherwise, but now a lot of gambling has now shifted online because there are so many gaming apps that you can find online, and they sometimes you feel that they are the online version of the offline gambling games. So there are few such games like Dream 11, Paytm First, etc. So when you talk of these online games, they may be of two types. One is that they are game of skill, or that they are game of chance. So the same game has been interpreted by different courts as differently. Some courts say it is a game of chance, some courts say it is a game of skill. So when something is a game of chance, then it amounts to more speculation, and that is why we call it as gambling. But if it is a game of skill, then that is completely fine. So if you are talking about online gambling and these online games which are played, which are nothing but the online versions of the gambling which is otherwise done, so therefore we need to regulate or ban it. So if we ask a question whether should we ban it or should we regulate it, the better answer is that we regulate it. Then we give about certain arguments as to why it is better to regulate online gambling rather than banning it. So in that, the first reason is revenue generation. Now imagine if you are completely banning online gambling will still go on, but it will be completely driven underground. So when it goes on underground, then all the money that is generated through online gambling will become a part of your black money. So the generation of black money will increase if online gambling is banned, because online gambling is for sure to continue, but it will continue underground. So therefore any revenue that is generated will be a part of your black money, which the government cannot even tax it, nor can it use it for the welfare of people. Rather, recognize these online gambling websites or anything, then provide them with licenses for operation, and then tax them and monitor them, then whatever revenue generation is happening, then government can get a part of it in the form of taxes and license fee. So therefore, it will help the government in revenue generation if it is going to regulate online gambling rather than just ban it. The second reason is the employment generation. So any online gambling activity will require a lot of people, and therefore it is going to generate a lot of employment. The same argument is in fact given for regulating casinos in Sikkim and Goa, because these casinos employ a lot of people, and they generate a lot of employment. So therefore this has been proved even in United Kingdom also, where a lot of employment has been generated because of the existence of these casinos and the other such places and sites. So employment generation is another argument why we need to regulate online gambling rather than banning it. The third is better monitoring. So there are chances that some of these online gambling sites, they may do some illegal unwarranted activities, but the government will be able to monitor them only when government knows about their existence. So if the government bans them, they will just go underground, and government will not even be able to monitor what kind of activities these websites are running. So it is better for the government to regulate it rather than ban, so that government knows that these are the existing players who are engaged in the activity of online gambling, and therefore government can give them licenses, can monitor their activities, and do all such things. For example, these match fixing things were happening through online. So government can, through better monitoring of these sites, it can regulate whether and see whether these kind of match fixing are happening online or not. So that way government can better monitor these activities rather when they are banned. So it is better for the government to regulate rather than ban. So these are some of the arguments that are given as to why the online gambling must be regulated and they must not be banned. So in this case, the next question definitely is, if it is better to regulate than to ban, then how is it that we can regulate them? So one good example or one good benchmark that we get is from the United Kingdom. United Kingdom has a Gambling Act of 2005. So what this act does is it differentiates gambling activities into various types. So first it says casual gaming, which is done casually by people. Next is the mid-level gaming, and then comes the high stake gaming, where the stakes involved are high, where people bet more than 5,000. So some monetary limit. So high stake gaming is there. So like that, it is divided into some categories under this Gambling Act of 2005, and based on which category the particular gaming falls, then a licensing regime will be developed for that. So obviously, if some game falls under the high stake and higher categories, then its licensing fee is going to be much more than the one that is required for casual gaming. So this one is a classic example how we can base our own regulatory regime based on this act by dividing the various types of games into various categories, and then having a different licensing fee for each of these categories. So that can be one of the good ways to regulate the online gambling. So this is about online gambling, whether it should be banned or whether it should be regulated. So this you can put under one of those miscellaneous topics in which UPSC can randomly sometimes just ask. So you must not be caught by surprise and you must not go blank at that time. So we have discussed this topic. So now we move on to the next one. The next topic we'll be discussing is about stubble burning, or it can also be a part of your issues related to environmental pollution, which are a part of your GS3 paper. So it is also one of the major issues that the farmers are facing, and stubble burning every year has become a major issue because that is how the winters in Delhi and the nearby regions are getting so much polluted, apart from the other reasons, of course. So stubble burning has always been in news because of the winter related pollution. So now the problem on part of the farmers is that the farmers first sow the paddy crop in the Kharif season, and when they harvest their paddy crop, they after harvesting the paddy crop, they will have to sow the wheat crop. But the paddy crops, when they are harvested, the paddy straw remains in the soil. So that will have to be removed, which is again a very laborious process, and the farmers don't do that. Or the paddy straw must be allowed to decompose in the soil. For that it will take about 45 to 50 days, which is too much of a time for the farmers. So farmers just cannot let these paddy straw decompose on its own in about 45 to 50 days, because farmers also will have to sow the next crop, which is a wheat crop. So they don't have these many days of waiting margin for them to wait for these paddy straws to decompose and degrade on their own. So that is why what they do is they just burn this stubble, they just burn all these paddy straws in the field itself, so that the field is clear, and within 20 days the field is ready for sowing the wheat crop. So that is what the farmers do. But this stubble burning will create a lot of particulate matter pollution, so this needs to be avoided. But then we also have to think from the point of view of farmers, from their farmers' interest, because they really can't afford to leave the farm for 40 to 45 days till the paddy straw decomposes. So that is why now the Indian Council for Agricultural Research has come out with a microbe based Pusa decomposer. So what this decomposer is going to do, basically it is it's a capsule in which there are a lot of different strains of fungi. So these fungi are going to be sprayed on these paddy straws, and they will fasten the decomposition of the paddy straw. So something that would naturally happen in about 45 days, the decomposition of paddy straws that would naturally happen in 45 days, can now happen in just 20-25 days. So in this much days itself, this capsule, which contains multiple strains of fungi, when it is sprayed on the paddy straw, can decompose the paddy straw in very less time of just 20 to 25 days. So this will thus help the farmers to get rid of the paddy straw without burning the stubble, and at the same time they will be able to decompose the paddy straw within 20-25 days itself, so they won't have to even delay the sowing of the wheat crop, and at the same time pollution problem is solved. And also whatever paddy straw gets decomposed, a compost is also going to be made out of this, which the farmers can apply on the fields for supplying nutrients to the plants. So it is a win-win situation, and also there are three advantages. One is that the pollution problem is solved, second is that the farmers don't have to delay their sowing of the wheat crop, that can also be done timely, and thirdly, the whatever decomposition has happened of the paddy straw, we can make a compost out of which can be applied by the farmers on their fields for as manure. So these are the three advantages out of this microbe based Pusa decomposer. So if you are writing a question on say pollution based issues, and one of the causes of pollution in the Delhi NCR has been the stubble burning, which has always very much been in news for at least the past 3-4 years. So in such cases, as part of the solution or in your conclusion, you can mention that this Pusa decomposer has now been designed by ICAR, in which multiple strains of fungi are sprayed over it, which will fasten the decomposition and enable the farmers to sow the wheat crop timely. At the same time, the decomposed straw can be made into a compost, which the farmers can use as manure. So such solutions you have to come out with, where the problem of environmental pollution is also solved and the farmers problem is also solved. So you can mention that this as an example when you're talking about pollution issues and how they can be reduced. Now we move on to the next topic. The next topic we'll be discussing is the Insolvency and the Bankruptcy Code and its analysis, which is a part of your GS3 syllabus. So about Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code we have already discussed before. So we will further this discussion today. So first of all, what IBC aims at doing is a time-bound resolution. So IBC is basically dealing with those firms which have gone insolvent and bankrupt, and they are unable to pay back the loan and the principal amount to their creditors. Then they will have to undergo this insolvency process, by which the creditors will also be getting some amount, and the insolvency is going to be resolved by maybe providing more support to the firm so that it is able to improve and scale its operations and thereby emerge more strong economically, and then paying back the creditors. So it is going to be a time bound resolution. Mostly what happens in the case of insolvency is that if the proceedings are delayed, then the firm which is already insolvent, it will further lose the value of its assets. Then if it further loses the value of its assets, then the creditors will be able to get even less, or the creditors will be able to recover even less amount from these insolvent firms. So that is why time plays a very crucial role here, and time bound resolution is very important, which is what the IBC aims at. So we have already seen the important time that the IBC provides for 180 days plus 90 days or something. So we have already seen the time bound resolution that IBC gives emphasis upon. So it is also a benefit for the creditors, because now creditors will also have hope that at least some of the amount that they have given to this insolvent firm, they are going to recover back. So it is a benefit for the creditors as well. And it also is going to promote investor confidence, because the investor will feel confident only when the investor knows that in the case of failure, how that firm is going to be dealt with. Whether exit is as easy as entry, that is very important. So if even economic survey spoke of the Chakravyuha challenge, where entry is liberalized but exit is not. So there is no way out for these insolvent firms, and they don't know what to do. In this process, whatever left assets and their value is there, that is also going to depreciate over a period of time. So in that case, even the investor is badly stuck with a failing enterprise, and even the creditors like banks, they also are not able to recover the remaining value from the assets of the enterprise. So therefore, this is going to promote more investor confidence, because investor knows that in the worst case, if his or her venture is going to fail, then there is recourse to insolvency proceedings, and there is a good exit for that company or the firm. So it is also going to improve and promote investor confidence. So these are the important these are the reasons why IBC is very important. But however, there are some issues, like for instance, the backlog of cases has been more than 4 crore with the courts. This is the backlog of cases for insolvency proceedings, which is now pending before the courts. Next is the enforceability of contracts. So even on the ease of doing business, if you see, enforceability of contracts is one sub-index on which India has performed very poorly, and India has not been able to improve much in this particular parameter, even though overall EODB has improved a lot. So on an average, it takes about 1445 days to enforce a contract in India, which is very huge. So we need to reduce this a lot, and this is one more issue that is persistently occurring even in our ease of doing business, which we haven't been able to reduce. So next we are going to see what are all the other important measures that the government has taken to improve the investment climate in India. So you may be asked a question that comment upon the measures taken by the government to improve the investment climate. So when this question suddenly comes up, then you will fall short of important measures that the government has taken to improve the investment climate. You will be able to remember like 1, 2 or 3, but more than that you will not be able to remember. So that is why it is better to prepare these kinds of content beforehand, so that you already know at least some 5 to 6 good content which you can write under this particular answer. So what are all the measures to improve the investment climate? I have just listed what is given in this article. One is the introduction of GST, which is a one nation, one tax regime. So it has reduced the compliance burden on the industries. That is one. The IBC, which we have just discussed. The government has also come out with Commercial Courts, Commercial Divisions and Commercial Appellate Division Act of 2015, in which there will be separate commercial courts and separate commercial divisions, and the normal high courts are going to be set up, which will specifically deal with the commercial disputes between two parties. So this is going to give more specialization for the court also to deal with these kind of matters, and even for the people who are a part of the dispute, they can expect a more quicker resolution of their disputes, because these are specialized benches which will only hear the commercial disputes. So this is one. And government has also removed a lot of obsolete laws that were there in our legal documents. So it was more than, government has already removed more than 1500 obsolete and archaic, the British era laws has now been removed by the government. So otherwise it is a legal jungle, and traveling through this legal jungle will become a very cumbersome process. So therefore it's important to have some sunset clauses and remove those laws which are archaic and obsolete. So government has already removed 1500 such laws. So now your next homework is to come out with, I have already listed 4, now you have to come out with at least 4 more measures which the government has taken to improve the investment climate. So totally you will have 8 measures with you that the government has taken to improve the investment climate. So today's first homework was about Lal Bahadur Shastri Ji's contribution in different categories, and the second homework is to come out with measures to improve what measures the government has come out to improve the investment climate. So at least 4 measures you have to list in the comment section. Now we move on to the success of IBC. So the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, how has it performed? So we need some data which you can use it in your answers to support your answer. So this data that we are going to discuss is from the MCA itself, that is the Ministry of Corporate Affairs data only. So it is an authentic data. You can mention the source as MCA data. So first it says that if you look at our ease of doing business rankings, when we were earlier discussing about the ease of doing business rankings, we even drew a graph to indicate how our rankings has been improving over a period of time. So go back to that ICANN and then you can revise EODB rankings. So our EODB rankings has also improved. So one reason, there are multiple reasons for this, but definitely one reason is because we introduced the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. In fact, under the ease of doing business, you have a parameter called as the Resolving Insolvency Index. So in this Resolving Insolvency Index, our ranking has improved from 108 to 52. So 108 it was in 2018 and 52 was in 2019. So there has been so much improvement in this. Then next we come to the recovery rate. Even the recovery rate has improved from just being 26% in 2018 to 72% in 2019. And also the time taken for this recovery has also improved. It was 4.3 years in 2018 and it has become to 1.6 years in 2019. So these are the important data that you can use to support your argument that the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code has been a success, because of which we have seen such improvements in our recovery rate and the time taken for recovery and the insolvency resolution as well. And this data is from the Ministry of Corporate Affairs itself. So this is about the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. Now we move on to the next topic. The next topic is the United Nations Convention on Biodiversity. So this can be a part of your GS2 or GS3 syllabus, because in GS2 you have a topic called as the international conventions and etc. So this can be a part of that. Or in GS3 under your topic of environment also you may be asked about the United Nations Convention on Biodiversity. So this whole article was talking about the fact that recently on September 30th there was this United Nations summit of this Convention on Biodiversity. So the countries met and they discussed upon a couple of things. So that is the reason why this convention is now in news. So whenever you are talking about a convention, first of all, if you're writing any answer on environment in general and the ecological protection, environmental protection, wildlife protection, so on any of these topics, if you're writing an answer, then you can just make a mention of United Nations Convention on Biodiversity and stress the importance of collaboration at the international level and a collaborative action which is required to handle these issues. So you can make a mention of this convention in your answer. Otherwise, you may be asked a full-fledged question on how this convention is performing, or you may just be asked about what role these conventions play in conserving the biodiversity. So in which case we will just analyze some of the important things that were mentioned in this particular article. So first it says that when this September 30th, when all the parties to this convention, they met, convention on parties, when they met, they discussed that the current biodiversity loss that has actually happened over a couple of, over so many years now. So this biodiversity loss has actually been linked to the animal pathogens that are now born and are spreading. So, in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, the countries of the who are party to this convention, they have agreed that these animal pathogens are there today because of the biodiversity loss and the exploitation of the environment that has been done for now hundreds of years. So this is the first agreement, or this is the first acknowledgement that they have done, that this biodiversity loss is actually led to the spread of animal pathogens. The second is the fact that way back in 2010, these countries who are a party to this convention had set up 20 targets. So this convention in 2010 was held in Aichi, Japan. So this Aichi targets were finalized in 2010, and these targets were to be achieved by 2020. So these targets were about the biodiversity convention in various fields, whether it is the conserving the biodiversity in the forests, in the grasslands, or in the marine areas, inland waters. So in different ways, how the biodiversity can be conserved, and what are all the targets. So that is what these Aichi targets were about. That were set in 2010 in Japan. So the targets were set to be achieved by 2020. So now it has been clear that out of these 20, none of the targets of the Aichi targets have been now fulfilled. In fact, all of these are just partly full. Not even a single target has been completely achieved. So this shows how, if you're talking about the performance of this convention, then you can say that this convention met in 2010, set some Aichi targets, but then it didn't succeed in fulfilling even one out of the 20 targets. So this shows about the lack of performance of this convention. So the failure of the Aichi targets is another important thing that you have to remember. Next is the World Wildlife Fund's Living Planet Index. So this World Wildlife Fund releases the Living Planet Index. The name of the index itself is very important from the prelims point of view, where every year you will be asked some index and which authority or which institution releases it. So it is a World Wildlife Fund which releases the Living Planet Index. So this particular index has shown how the vertebrate populations have seen a very huge decline, and that is a key indicator of the biodiversity loss from the earth. So this vertebrate populations that have declined is by 68% compared to the 1970 levels. So there has been a 68% decline in the vertebrate population compared to the 1970 levels, which is very, very huge. So this again points to the lack of performance of this convention, that is how this convention has failed to conserve the biodiversity, which is precisely what this convention is supposed to do. So that has not been done by the convention. So these data you can also use to give an introduction to an answer which is talking about biological diversity. So this shows how the biological diversity is being lost because of the environmental exploitation. So these data will help you to make your answer more stronger when you're writing answers to questions like there has been a loss of biodiversity, what is the role that, what is it that we can do, and all such answers you can use these data. The thing that this article talks about is a way forward, as in what we need to do. So on the one hand, we have convention on biodiversity, but we must also ensure, we must also not miss the fact that there is this phenomena of climate change as well. So climate change has a very important bearing on the conservation of the biodiversity. So a lot of biodiversity could be lost if climate change is not brought under control. So therefore it is very important for this convention, the United Nations Convention on Biodiversity, to be aligned with the Paris Convention of UNFCCC, which is about controlling the carbon emissions and thereby controlling climate change. So there has to be a recognition that the biodiversity loss and climate change are intricately linked, and that is why these two conventions must align themselves and they must set their targets and goals. That is the first thing. Second thing this article talks about is the importance of partnerships. Whenever we are looking for conserving the biodiversity, it's very important that we also directly indulge and involve the people, the indigenous people who are living in those areas, because these are the people who are much affected if there is a loss of biodiversity. So their interests are directly linked to the conservation of biodiversity. Also, conservation in the long term can happen only with the population, only with the cooperation of the local population. So that is why the indigenous people must be included while formulating the conservation plans, and they are the ones who can conserve the local ecosystem. So this local partnerships, developing the local partnerships is very important. The third important area is clean energy, which is moving away from the polluting sources of energy like fossil fuels and relying on more renewable, clean and green energy like the renewable sources, wind, solar, etc. So that is what is important, because as we just discussed, how the biodiversity and climate change are intricately linked. So next is ecological agriculture. So food production is going to be there in the future as well to feed all our tummies, but then agriculture itself has become a major source of emissions. So agriculture also has to be climate proof, and agriculture should also be more eco-friendly. So that is what we must strive to achieve. Next is a waste management. Because of the increasing consumption, the waste generation has also increased a lot. So it is important for us on the one hand to minimize the waste generation, but on the other hand to also try to recover energy from the waste. So it is like waste to energy. So from the waste, whatever energy you can recover, try to do that so as to minimize the waste generation, and also out of whatever waste is generated, try to recover as much of energy as possible. So these are the way forward that this article has suggested in going forward what we must do. So now we move on to the next topic. The next topic is about the NCPCR, which is nothing but the National Commission for Protection of Child Rights. So this is actually a statutory body. So all these constitutional, statutory, regulatory bodies, they come under your GS paper 2. So this National Commission for Protection of Child Rights and its performance is definitely a part of your GS2 syllabus. So basically NCPCR is tasked for upholding, monitoring and also facilitating the child care and the rights of the child in India. So the NCPCR has the responsibility to uphold, to monitor and to facilitate the child rights in the country. So that is what it does. So when it comes to monitoring, there are several child care institutions, and these child care institutions give shelter to those children who have been abused or who have faced so much of discrimination and violence and exploitation. So these child care institutions, maybe some of them are run by the government itself, some are run by the NGOs. So there are several child care institutions, and the NCPCR is going to monitor how the child rights are ensured and what kind of environment the child is living in, whether the child has a good environment within these child care institutions. So this is what the work of NCPCR is. But recently there have been two issues revolving the NCPCR. One is that way back in 2015, Supreme Court had told NCPCR to conduct social audits on child care institutions, because there have been some of the child care institutions that were in news where the children were actually abused, they were sexually exploited, and all of those things were happening. So it was a good measure to, it is always good to keep these child care institutions under regulation so that we know the right, so as to ensure that the children are living in the right kind of environment. So in 2015, Supreme Court had ordered this NCPCR to conduct a social audit on these some of the child care institutions. So NCPCR did conduct these social audits on the child care institutions, but then it asked in 8 states, it asked the district magistrates to remove all the children who are housed under these child care institutions, to remove them from them, that is to deinstitutionalize them from those children from these child care institutions, and then rehabilitate and reintegrate them in the society. So this raised a lot of issues among the civil society organizations, and this move by the NCPCR was criticized a lot, because first of all, why is it that these children are in the child care institutions? It is because there may be some issues with their family. They must have faced a lot of abuse, physical and mental, by the hands of their family members. They must have faced sexual abuse by their family members. So when these children are now going to be forcibly removed from the childcare institutions and put back to their families, there is a good chance that these children may further they will continue to face those abuse and torture that they faced at their homes. So this measure by the NCPCR, asking the district magistrate to mandatorily remove all the children from the child care institutions and then rehabilitate them in the society, was widely criticized. So this was one issue about the NCPCR. The second issue was now on October 2nd, there were reports that the NCPCR had conducted raids on some of the NGO run child care institutions, because it wanted to see whether the NGOs may be getting some foreign funds, and these foreign funds may be routed by the NGOs to these childcare institutions. So NCPCR wanted to see if these foreign funds are being misused by the NGOs in any manner. So because it wanted to check whether the foreign funds are being used properly or not, there were reports that the NCPCR had conducted some raids on these childcare institutions. So first of all, it is not the work of the NCPCR to look into the fact whether FCRA guidelines are being followed or not. And secondly, we all agree that there are several issues associated with the childcare institutions, and that needs to be resolved, so for which they need to be properly regulated. But conducting such raids is only going to make the matters worse, is not a good form of regulation. So properly regulated and streamline the functioning of the childcare institutions is good, but then conducting such raids, that too to see if the foreign funds are being utilized or not, does not serve the interest of the children. So this could have been avoided, and again NCPCR is being criticized for this. So overall, when you're talking about the NCPCR, you must know some of the good things that it has done, some of the bad things, or some of the criticism that it has faced, so that you can write a balanced answer whenever a question on its performance comes. So as I said, statutory, regulatory and constitutional bodies are very much a part of your GS2 syllabus. So you can expect a question on this. So you must prepare. So that is it for today. So from the 3 days newspaper, these were the other articles that were not really important. So you can see there are many of them. So you must not feel that how come so many articles are not important, because from an aspirant's point of view, I understand that you might feel very insecure and you might be tempted to go through the newspaper and see for yourself if I have covered everything or not. So I have read all the articles, and these were the unimportant articles. So for your sake, I have just listed down the topics upon which these articles are. So it's about US elections, which is not important. Labor reforms we have already discussed. Hathras case we have discussed. GST issue, border, Quad we have already discussed in detail. So if you're a consistent follower of ICANN, that's when you can make a lot of take advantage out of this initiative. So if you are on and off follower, you will not be able to understand anything, because if something on Quad I have discussed yesterday and there is another article today which is not adding any new content to it, then I will not be discussing such articles. So if you are a person who is watching today, then you might end up feeling that I have not covered the Quad issue today, but that is not the case, because the Quad issue today, what was covered, we have already covered earlier, and there was no new content today. So you must follow consistently if you want to take benefits out of this initiative. So there is no shortcut to this, and there is no alternative to this. So COVID vaccine, again, it's not useful from the exam point of view. So these were the topics upon which we had multiple articles. So they were either not important from the exam point of view, or they have been covered earlier and there was no new content. So today, remember that I have given you 2 small homeworks. One is about Lal Bahadur Shastri contributions, and the other is about I forgot what is the other about. Please remind me in the comment section and write the answer to that other question also. Thank you. Have a good day.